You know, if you've ever tried to learn Spanish, you have absolutely hit this wall. You translate a sentence word for word, you check it, it seems perfect, but it just sounds wrong. Well, today, we're going to get into exactly why that happens. And here's a spoiler, it's got nothing to do with your vocabulary. It's about rewiring your brain to run on a completely different operating system.
Okay, let's kick things off with a classic. How would you translate this sentence, "I need this by next Tuesday"? Seems pretty straightforward, right? It's something you'd say at work all the time. But trust me, getting this to sound natural in Spanish is a massive hurdle for most learners.
And hey, this isn't just some textbook example. This is a real person, a Reddit user, who is right in the middle of that struggle. And they put it perfectly. It's not about finding a way. It's about finding a natural way to talk about a deadline. I'm sure a lot of you have felt that exact same frustration.
And here it is. The answer they got from another user is the key to this whole thing. There's just no good one-to-one translation for a simple phrase like "this is due." You can't just swap the words out. You have to totally rethink the entire idea. And this, right here, is what I call the translation trap.
So to really get this, we first need to zoom out a bit, because the problem is actually way bigger than just English versus Spanish. Why? Because there's really no such thing as one single Spanish. We're talking about a massive, diverse universe of language.
Just look at the major differences. You've got pronunciation, like how the C and Z are pronounced like an S in Latin America, but more like a th in a lot of Spain. Then you've got vocabulary that changes completely from country to country. And even core grammar, like how you say the word you, can be totally different depending on where you are.
So the first big step to thinking in Spanish is to just let go of the idea that there's one correct version. There isn't. Each variety is its own complete system with its own logic. You have to start listening to the context instead of looking for a single universal rule.
Okay, so let's get practical. How do we start thinking differently? Well, the first step is to unlearn some of those invisible English rules that we use without even thinking. These are the automatic habits that are constantly tripping us up.
Here's a super simple one. Capitalization. In English, it's just automatic, right? We always capitalize the days of the week and the months of the year. But in Spanish, nope, they just stay lowercase. It feels a little weird at first, but it's one of those fundamental differences you just have to embrace.
And this idea extends to things like book titles. In English, we capitalize almost every important word. But in Spanish, the rule is way simpler. You pretty much just capitalize the very first word, and that's it. It seems like a small thing, but it shows a totally different approach to how the language is written down.
And what about the famous Oxford comma? You know, that little comma before the word "and" in a list? People in English argue about it constantly. Well, in Spanish, the argument is over, because you just don't use it, period. Unlearning that little reflex is another small but crucial step.
All right, so we've covered some basic grammar, but now we're going to get into the really mind-bending stuff. This is where you have to adopt a whole new logic for fundamental concepts like time and numbers.
So let's talk about telling time. In English, it's always "it is." It is 1, it is 2, it is 5. It never changes. But in Spanish, the verb is actually tied to the number. For 1 o'clock, which is singular, you say "es la una." But for every other hour, they're plural, so the verb becomes plural too. Son las dos, son las tres.
And this is where it gets really cool. Once you get past the half-hour mark, you stop adding minutes and you start subtracting them from the next hour. So 6:45 isn't 6 and 45 minutes. It's 7 minus a quarter. Son las siete menos cuarto. It's a completely different way of framing time, but it's totally logical once you get it.
This shift in logic also applies to big numbers. So let me ask you this. A US billion is 1,000 million. We all know that. But what is a Spanish billón? Is it the same thing?
And the answer is a huge no. They are not even close to the same thing. What we call a billion in the US is called mil millones, or 1,000 million in Spanish. The Spanish word billón is actually what we would call a trillion. This isn't just a tiny translation error. Getting this wrong can lead to a mistake worth billions, or even trillions.
So all of this, the grammar, the numbers, it all leads us to our final and maybe most important point. Some words aren't just words. They're like little suitcases packed with cultural context and history. And for these, a dictionary is almost useless.
Let's look at 3 quick examples. First, America. When we say it, we mean the United States. But in Spanish, America refers to 2 entire continents, North and South. Or take wilderness. For English speakers, it has this beautiful natural vibe, but its Spanish equivalents often suggest a dangerous, deserted wasteland. And then there's bug.
The word bicho might seem innocent, but in a place like Puerto Rico, it's an incredibly offensive vulgarity. This is where direct translation goes from just being wrong to being actively harmful. And that really is the heart of it all. True fluency, in any language, is so much more than memorizing words. It's about learning to see the world through a different lens. It's understanding that even basic ideas like time and numbers can be constructed in a completely different but equally valuable way.
So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on. After seeing how a concept like a due date or wilderness doesn't really travel well, what's a concept from English that you think is just impossible to truly translate? It really makes you think about how deeply our language shapes our reality.